All right, this is Ken from Kansas, and I want to start the discussion tonight with a look at two scenarios from the Starobin book and take a look at how that scenario could affect the elements of higher education based on the standard list of questions that we were considering. Briefly, in the China scenario, the U.S. is replaced by China as the sole hegemonic power. And so now a Chinese century, in Starobin's view, really has China focusing on economic advantages and expanding its sphere of influence, as opposed to the U.S., which he thinks of as a power that's trying to get moral superiority or is concerned about raising standards of human rights around the world and something like equality and rights of women. He views the Chinese century really being organized around China's economic advantages. And so we already see some elements of this now. China has what I would describe as a relentless drive to secure natural resources. While the U.S. has been involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, China's been locking up economic deals with Canada, Chile, Brazil, Australia for the long-term material resources they need to be able to continue their manufacturing development. So we could expect human rights concerns to take a back seat, and we think that the interest of China's prestige and influence is really tied more to their economic power as opposed to having a moral high ground. They're a very pragmatic century. I added this piece. I see a high probability of increased exodus of Chinese nationals to key trading partners, and that solves a couple problems for China. One is that it helps them alleviate some of the economic pressure in the homeland. The cities are under strain, but it also creates a demographic inside the target country, which makes it easier for them to conduct long-term economic business, gives them a little moral authority, allows them to participate in the political system. This has been sort of a deliberate strategy already with China and Canada. So if that's the nature of that century, these were some of my estimates. First, on the global drivers of higher education, I see an increased focus now on hard sciences, engineering, alternative energy, and scientific agriculture. These are kind of the basic building blocks of life, and I see they are practical and focused on helping China develop her ability to satisfy her people because they have a rising standard of living, and that's the kind of practical approach that the Chinese have adopted. Less emphasis on basic R&D, more on applied technology. I see the competition now, the European Union, Japan, and the U.S. In one scenario, we accept that second-class status, and we try to support humanities and the sciences equally. So we're considering whole person education. That's sort of the European model right now. But in the second scenario, I could see a return to basics and trying to regain intellectual leadership. And so more state-sponsored education in hard sciences and technology. I see applied technology in there, a focused expenditure of federal and state dollars on targeted programs, and less general education. So I think higher education and things like in literature and that could probably suffer. Targeted expenditures in physical security, digital security. Chinese are concerned about that. The other regional powers would be interested in doing that to preserve trade secrets against Chinese competition. Environmental challenges will be absolutely crucial in a Chinese century because their own record on preserving and protecting the earth is so horrible. If they expand that mentality to the world, now suddenly we're going to accelerate the environmental crisis. And so I think expenditures, food, energy, and biodiversity will be the focus of attention of a lot of graduate programs. I think in the healthcare area, U.S. and Europe no longer able to afford expensive, high-cost healthcare. And so basic research in those areas will suffer, and I think you'll see emphasis on education for controlling pandemics and basic services more so than on innovation. So I see a slowdown on basic R&D and innovation. Inside the U.S., I see the American economy contracts because the dollar will no longer be the reserve currency, and so now suddenly our budgets get slashed dramatically. We won't be able to support commercial agriculture and more people going back to work on the farms. And you'll see more human labor being spent there. So I think higher education suffers as well, and it's probably a back-to-basics approach. Civil engineering and sustainable communities will be more important than scientific R&D. Certainly, clean energy and sustainable downsized manufacturing is a way to return to a sense of self-sufficiency. So I see more things like applied technology degrees than I do high-end scientific endeavors, which means that we lose our advantage there in global PhD production. I want to jump down to the risks. I see definitely this problem here, a reversal of the global movements for open source and free information. So I think a lot of the things that we take for granted about the open access and global university starts to suffer as the Chinese seek to preserve their secrets, and in response to the Chinese ascendancy, the competitor nations start trying to shut down open and unlimited access. I think I see higher ed degrees are going to be much more competitive now because of reduced funding, and it will favor economic imbalances. The economic haves will have access when other people won't, and I see more pressure to teach the test as we try to recover our back to basics. Federal government will absorb more of the higher education dollars and use that targeted for defense and security. The public is going to be willing to spend their money only on applied degrees. I think states are going to continue to look to consolidate, maybe even on a regional basis in their state-sponsored schools, so you don't have unlimited choices at every university. I think you'll see specialization. I see scholarships drying up. As the gatekeepers now, our role, shifting to our role, I think we have to, we're going to see competition for private research dollars. I think there's going to be real pressure on liberal arts and critical studies that wither and die. I see those as luxuries that we can't afford. I think these outreach and partnerships are going to be harder to come by, and degree granting and certification programs will become a competitive advantage for colleges, and so that's where the pressure to teach the test is really going to be. I don't see a repeat of MIT putting their courseware online because that favors the closed societies who can read our stuff but without them having to contribute. So I think the end of open university is in sight. I think as stewards of professions, I just want to highlight a couple things in there. We're going to be under pressure between this code of service to humanity and being global citizens, and that which comes with support of national interests. You know, we can afford to be global citizens when the U.S. is on top, but now if it comes a choice between, are you supporting the national interest and restricting access to your research, or are you going to be a good citizen and share openly with the world? I think there's an ethical and professional dimension that's at work in there. And I think this question here, why should we spend tax dollars to study postmodern French poetry when the Chinese are buying up the world, is going to be an economic driver that we all face. I see these funding priorities dominating economic paybacks, power and healthcare and clean water. I think in our servant leadership role, I want to conclude just with a couple points in there. As servant leaders, what I think matters for us is I think we've got to be prepared to make the hard arguments in the public debate about the value of education in a time of dwindling dollars. You can already see how many education dollars are being cut in the Republican budget cutting plans. There's a lot of education dollars at risk. Maintaining ethics and integrity in research will be a continued problem. because the importance of national interest is going to dominate. We've got to be advocates for students who are on the margins of performance. There's going to be a quality cut on people that may not have access, and now suddenly this whole debate about who should have access to higher education, is it a right, is it a responsibility, should it be a function of how much money you have, or do we somehow level the playing field? I think that becomes even more important. As administrators, we've got to be able to critically evaluate programs for their outcomes to see who gets the dollars. So that whole resource allocation is going to be crucially important. We've got to be decision makers in there. And at the same time, how do we continue to engage more students while dollars dwindle? I think that's an area technology can help address, but we've got to be able to do that sensibly, and we've got to make the argument why IT dollars for outreach are going to be as important as funding salaries and buildings. And then again, we've got this obligation to be beneficial to people in daily lives, not just from a practical but also from a philosophical perspective, and that is that education is not just a matter of bottom lines and what's the economic payoff, but there is a quality value of being a well-rounded, educated human being, the liberal arts argument. So I see all of those issues at play in a Chinese century. I see pressure on us mostly from economic, and then trying to figure out how to balance the needs of the nation against the needs of the world, and then also the ethical and leadership dimension that's going to be in play in a world of dwindling dollars and reduced U.S. influence around the world. Now suddenly we don't get to set the agendas. So those are the issues that I see coming out of a Chinese century, and so I'm going to go ahead and unmute us now, and I'll let you have at me, and fire when ready.
So Ken, my first question for you is, what role do you see with this changing education and changing obligations in the U.S.? What role do you see polytechnics and community colleges taking in lieu of four-year institutions?
Well, I think we're going to see a harmonized career path that includes everything from junior high to high school to communities and polytechs and vo-techs up to the four-year degree. I think that's going to be harmonized a lot more, and that we can't afford to spend the money on duplication, and I think states are going to take the lead on that. I think you'll see partnerships being developed where we aren't as worried about competing against each other for students, that we will have fewer students, and that we're going to want to make smoother transitions. So I see regional and state level partnerships to develop seamless programs that take people through these practical technical skills that we will need to regain our manufacturing base. That's pretty much what I see. I see fewer high end, but I see more integrated curriculum and programs and partnerships. I think you guys. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Brenda is still muted, just to let you know.
Oh, well, there was a reason for that.
But I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, I wanted to support what you had said. In Arkansas legislature, in our Department of Higher Ed, they've already started. If you bring forward a program, you have to say what's the closest college that offers that same program, and if they're too close, they won't allow you to duplicate resources. So already, we're confirming what you're saying. That's already starting to happen.
Yeah, I don't think that's an anomaly. I think that's definitely the path to the future. And there's a couple reasons. I don't see budgets improving in the next 10 years, and yet our population is expanding. And so one of the things that happens with education is that we improve the quality of our citizenship by attending public schools. And so there is a social good associated with education that goes beyond just individual careers. And at the same time, if you want to have an expanding student base, but also that's a more effective programs with dwindling dollars, we're going to see more of that. I think you guys are leading the way on getting that done.
And what do you think
Relative
about the legislature being involved? They're now coming in and saying, we're going to give you dollars based on retention.
Well, that's where we get into the discussion about measures of effectiveness and measures of performance. And the problem is the same thing that you see in private business, and that is a short-term focus on bottom-line measures with leadership that changes every 2 years. It's hard to maintain a long-term programmatic perspective with a dedicated funding stream. I think we're going to have to get into the place where we advocate for legislation that locks in dollars that, in 5 and 10 year chunks that can't easily be cut. But we're going to have to make the political and social argument for that, and that's going to be a real hard sell. I think we can help them understand what things ought to be measured. Like if retention is a bad thing to use as a basis for program evaluation, then we've got to make the case why it's bad and what is better. So we have to engage more and not stand back and say, oh, those idiots in the state capitol. We've got to somehow educate the decision makers better.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. So relative to that too, Ken, the article, A Bad Social Good, looks at this idea of education as a social good and whether or not it's a good social good and what are the complexities within that. That also brings up the question of academic freedom and tenure is starting to phase out. So how do we play this servant leadership role when we're constrained by a lack or loss of tenure?
Well, I think I would not be surprised to see that trend continue. I mean, they're even talking about constitutional amendments to keep Supreme Court justices other than not lifetime appointees, and academic freedom is important, but in many cases it makes it easy to have positions that are out there just to be out there. Maybe we have to be more thoughtful because we are realizing the consequences of taking unpopular positions. Teaching is the only career field in which that's really where that's a freebie. I mean, political leaders and thought leaders have to face that moral courage question all the time. I think how to preserve academic freedom, and which is not just freedom to say what you want, but freedom to study the things that you want to study in an era of dwindling dollars is crucial. I think tenure is going to go the way of the dinosaur unless we actively make the case why academic freedom is crucial to the preservation of freedom and democracy around the world. Speaking truth to power without the protections of academic freedom will have a chilling effect. And if you can't get those ideas expressed to the young people in schools, then they will have been conformed into obedience by the time they graduate from school, and then it'll be too late for them to adopt courageous positions. So academic freedom is vital to democracy. That's sort of the line of argument that has to be made to state legislatures who would want to tie resources to employment. That's an easy political football for them to kick. That's a real issue.
Ken, it's Brenda. I just have one question talking about the multipolar world and how the balance, creating a balance of the power through looking at just this one piece of the book that you reviewed tonight. How would that build into accreditation and the competition types of things into the future? Well,
in my assessment here of the Chinese century, what I tried to show was how when you shift from a U.S.-centric world to a Chinese-centric world, that the philosophy and the motivations of education shift as a function of the dominant culture. So we have sort of a high-minded, puritanical, human rights, democracy approach, not just crass economics, although we're accused of that. And if it shifts to the Chinese side, well, maybe their culture now starts being expressed through politics, and now it becomes, or through education, and now it becomes economic centric. My sense is that in a multipolar world, that could take one of two forms, where you have the danger of military alliances, which is what I think Starobin talks about, military alliances that threaten survival. And so now the role of educators in that kind of a fearful multipolar world that's seeking military advantage, now how can we become emissaries of peace and global citizens? But there's a second way that multipolar world could shake out, and that is something like a balance of power that is peaceful, in which the distribution of power and economic wealth prevents anybody from having global domination, and we can maybe reduce global military spending to verifiable limits, and now suddenly we have a peace dividend that's global. And so now we would have this dual function of how do we support this balance of power globally, how do we cooperate with those that are in our region and in our side of the alliance and all that. And so I think this whole notion of global citizenship versus national interest and the good of humanity is manifest even larger in the multipolar world. We got to find ways to preserve peace through balance of power. And then, because what happens in the single power world is you're going to see it right now when the U.S. sort of guarantees a Pax Americana. Well, when that superpower diminishes, suddenly there's a power vacuum, and now the threat of instability and violence is greater. So a multipolar world sort of precludes that kind of dramatic, volatile shift in orientation. So the role of higher education in preserving and achieving that kind of stability is a moral and ethical question. So I think those are maybe, I don't know if Starobin goes into it in that detail. He takes more, I think, the military approach, but I don't think that's the only way to look at multipolar.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's that was the extent of my notes, and so I'm gonna sign off on this one. I will convert this into an audio and a visual link. I'll hook it up for us, and I'll post my notes in the Moodle. So this is Ken signing off on Starobin.